Come closer. Have a seat by the fire. I've got a story to tell you. One time, a long time ago, there was an old woman who baked 5 pies. Now, she was busy doing other work, and by the time she took them out of the oven, they were a bit over. And as an old woman, her teeth weren't quite as strong as they had once been. And so she called to her daughter. Daughter, come and take these pies and set them to the side, and they're certain to come again. Now, by come again, what she meant was that sooner or later those pies would soften up a little bit, and then she'd be able to eat them herself. But the daughter, she was a bit dull. And as she took those pies away, the smell went into her nose, and she set them aside and looked at them and thought, well, now Mother says they'll come again. So I could eat these here right now, and then those pies will come again. And being very hungry herself, that's exactly what she did. She ate all 5 of those pies from the first right on through to the last. Nothing left but crumbs. Now, a few hours went by, and her mother grew hungry. Daughter, she said, go and fetch those pies now. They're certain to have come again. Well, the daughter excitedly went to look and check on the pies, and much to her surprise, there was nothing there but crumbs. The pies had not come again, as her mother had promised. No, Mother, they haven't come again. Not a single one. Not a single one. Well, now the mother couldn't believe that. Certainly it had been enough time. So she went over to check those pies herself, and she realized what had happened. She looked down at that plate of nothing but crumbs and looked at her dull daughter and saw matching crumbs on the front of her dress. Oh, daughter. Oh, daughter. Well, there wasn't much that she could do. And so, hungry and frustrated, she went outside to sit in front of their small cabin and get the last bit of light to do some more work. She took out her sewing. She started to sew. And as she sewed, she sang away her frustration. My daughter ate 5 pies today. My daughter ate 5 pies today. My daughter ate 5 pies today. And she began just singing that sad, frustrated song. What she didn't know was that off in the woods near their home was traveling a very rich merchant. Now, he heard from horseback the singing of the woman, but he couldn't quite make out the words. And so he leapt down from his horse and walked toward the cabin. And as he approached, he called to the woman so that he wouldn't startle her. Old woman, excuse me. The woman stopped her sewing and was surprised to see the man, and she knew instantly who he was. He was dressed all in fine clothes and shiny leather boots that went right up to his knees, and he carried with him the finest steed. Woman, what was it that you were singing? Well, now the old woman was embarrassed to have been caught singing, and she was mortified to have anyone hear the words that she sang, to hear what her daughter had done. And so quickly she decided that she would lie. My daughter sewed 5 shirts today. My daughter sewed 5 shirts today. By my garters, said the man. 5 shirts. Your daughter sewed all in one day. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, she did. Well, now, the rich merchant, he was taken aback. He sat down next to the woman and he said, Madam, I have been looking for a wife. And a wife with such fine skill would be a wonderful thing to have. You may not know me, but I own several stores, and a woman who could sew that way in just a month's time could fill my shelves. If your daughter is eligible, I should like to marry her, and I will strike this bargain with you. I would not have her live as someone in my capture, working only for my rewards. 11 months of the year, she would do nothing but be my wife. She would eat the finest foods and drink the finest wine. She would wear the finest silks and meet the finest people. But for the last month of every year, she must sew 5 shirts every day. If she doesn't, why, I shall hang her from a tree until she dies. Well, now that was a very serious bargain, but the mother was somewhat keen to be rid of her daughter, who was not very dull and did not have very many other prospects. And here was the richest man in town offering. So she agreed. She figured in her head that a year was a very long time, and certainly the man would forget about the bargain. They were married shortly thereafter, and the man took the daughter away to his fine, beautiful mansion. And he was a good man. He lived true to his word. She ate every day the finest food and drank the finest wine. She wore the finest silk gowns, and he held beautiful parties where she met the finest people. And for 10 long months, they saw each other every day and grew closer and fonder. The man was kind, and the daughter saw this. But around the end of the 10th month, she started to feel a little bit weary, a little bit wary, because there had been a bargain made. And the daughter, remember, was somewhat dull. She had never learned, despite the many lessons her mother tried to give her, to sew at all, let alone 5 shirts in one day. But all these months, her husband had never once mentioned the bargain. And so a calm fell over her, and she thought, well, perhaps he's forgotten. And so she spent weeks and days, again, eating the finest foods and drinking the finest wine, wearing the finest silk gowns and meeting the finest people. But on the night before the 11th month of the year, her husband brought her to a room in their mansion she'd never seen before. He opened up the door and bid her come inside. And there was not in that room but a bed for her to sleep, and a table piled high with bolts of the finest linen and spools of fine linen thread and needles to sew and scissors to cut. And he sat her down on the bed. Now, wife, he says, I love you dearly, but the time has come for the bargain to be done. I will keep you in this room for 1 month, and every day I shall return in the morning, and you shall present to me the 5 shirts that you've sewn. And if, after the month has passed, you have sewn all the shirts that you've promised you would, why, then we shall continue to live our wonderful lives together. But if you have not on any day accomplished this task, why, I shall hang you from a tree until you're dead. And then he kissed her on the forehead, and he left the room. And as he closed the door, she heard the click of a lock. Well, now there she sat, and she didn't know how to sew, and she didn't know what to do, because what could she do? There was no way that she could sew 5 shirts in one day, and she began to weep. What would she do? Because she loved him. And as she sat there in her tears and in her sorrow, she heard a tap, tap, tap on the window outside. Well, now this was very strange, because they had climbed many steps to this room, and she knew there were many floors high in the mansion. So she went to the window and pushed its panes open. She peered out into the night and then stepped back from the window, because there, floating just outside, was a creature, not quite a man, but not quite a bird or an animal of any other sort. She moved slowly back, afraid that if she moved too quickly it would attack, but it simply floated inside and then settled itself before her. Its color was dark. It was black. It seemed almost like ink or feathers, but it moved and it was still. She wasn't quite sure. The eyes of the creature, they glowed a bit yellow. It had long feet and a small tail that switched back and forth. The most horrible thing, the thing that gave her the most fear, were the fingers of the creature, which were long and tapered down thin at the ends to fine points. And as she looked at him, trying to figure out what he was, he tapped those fingers together. They sounded like the metal of needles. "Why do you cry?" he said. Well, she was surprised that he could speak and still caught in her fear, and she just shook her head. Well, the creature moved slowly closer. "Why do you cry?" he said. Well, clearly, if he wished to harm her, he'd have done so already, so she decided that perhaps she would just share her sorrow with him. What could it hurt? So she told him about the bargain that her mother had made with the rich merchant, and about the life that they had lived for the past 11 months, and how she absolutely could not sew 1 shirt, let alone 5. And as she finished her sad story, the little creature he gave a chuckle. Well, now this upset the daughter quite a bit. Why are you chuckling at me? This is quite a problem." "Oh," said the thing, it is not a problem at all. 5 shirts. "Oh, 5 shirts I can do easily. 5 shirts is nothing to me." And he tapped his long fingers together. Well, now, as I've clearly made plain, no one ever gets something for nothing, the daughter said. "So what is it that you bargained me for these shirts?" "Well," said the creature, "I am in need of a wife. And if I sew these shirts for you and bring them to you every morning before your husband arrives, I will ask you to say my name, which you must guess. And I will be generous," he said, spreading those long fingers wide open, "and give you 3 chances every day for the whole month. Now, if you guess my name, I will continue to make your shirts. But if you don't guess my name by the time the month is done, why then you'll be my wife." Well, the daughter had little other choice, so she agreed to the bargain with the creature. And he gathered up that fine linen, bolt and bolt in each arm, and floated right back out the window. Well, the next morning, early before she'd even risen, the daughter heard the tap, tap, tap on the window. She walked over, wiping the sleep from her eyes, almost as if she'd had a terrible dream, and pushed open the panes of the window, and there was the little creature, just as dark as he'd been last night, if not darker in the early morning light. And on his arms now, instead of the bolts of linen, were 5 beautifully sewn shirts. He floated into the room and settled down before her and presented the shirts. "Now," he said, "guess my name." Well, the daughter had barely thought about it. She'd been so exhausted by her grief that she made 3 wild guesses. "Is it Bill?" she said. "No, it's not Bill." "Oh, John?" "No, it's not John." "Fred?" "Oh, it's not Fred." And he clacked his long fingers together and then grabbed up more bolts of linen and leapt out the window, just as her husband knocked on the door. She heard the clank of keys in the lock, and he opened the door and greeted her. And there on the table were the 5 shirts. "My wife, these are beautiful, so finely sewn." "So well done. I shall have the maids bring you breakfast right away, and your luncheon and your supper, and I will see you again in the morning." And he closed the door and click, click, locked it again. So this went on every day of the month. Now, every night the creature would come back, deliver shirts, and in the morning the husband would take them, lock the woman in the room again, and her day would begin, one day to the next, to the next, to the next, until finally she began to panic. Just as her time had wound down with the bargain with her husband, the time began to wind down with the bargain with the creature. It was the night before the very last day, and she had not yet guessed the creature's name. Her husband came in to see her as the maids brought her her supper. He asked her how she was, and she was a bit sad, a bit tired, she told him. He sat down beside her on the bed and placed his arm around her, held his large hand over hers, and just sat with her. He was so pleased with all the work that she'd done, and after tomorrow, after she'd sewn the final 5 shirts, why, they could resume their normal lives. She began to weep because she only had 3 guesses left, and she had run through all the names she could think of, all the names she'd ever heard, even names that she'd made up, and none of them had been right. And as she sat there in her tears and in her sorrow, her husband began to chuckle. "Husband, why do you laugh at me?" "Oh, no, wife, I don't laugh at you. I was thinking about something that happened last night. I was out on a hunt, riding into deep woods where I had never ridden before, and I thought I heard singing. So I came off my horse and walked through dark trees and through prickling briars, following the tune. And finally, as I pushed through a final copse, I saw there a little fire. And around that fire danced a creature or a man or an animal. I couldn't tell you exactly what, but it was all of those and none of those. And this creature had a small tail that switched back and forth. And its flesh or its feathers or its fur was a dark black. And its eyes, they glowed yellow. But the strangest thing was its fingers, which were long and thin and tapered to points like needles, the daughter said. Yes, like needles. And as this creature danced round the fire, it sang a song. It sang, "Try as you might, you can't name me. I'm the one they call Tim Toty." And then, wife, it laughed. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. And now suddenly the daughter, she dried her tears. It was not the strangest thing she'd ever seen. It was the exact same thing that she had seen. And so now she knew. Her husband gave her a kiss on the forehead and left again, closed the door, clicked that lock. And then, as she sat happily eating fine food and drinking fine wine and smoothing the fine silks of her very fine dress, she heard the familiar tap, tap, tap on the window. She went to it readily, opened the panes, and there the creature was. A huge smile in the darkness of itself, long teeth that she'd not noticed before. He floated in and settled down beside her and laid out another fine, beautifully sewn shirts. "Well," he said, clacking his fingers together, "the final 5 shirts, and your final 3 guesses." "Yes, Esteban," she said. No, not Esteban," he said very excitedly. 2 more. Gregmont. Gregmont, no, not Gregmont. Well then, my final guess is Tim Toe T. The eyes of the little creature went from yellow to bright red, like a fire had burst inside of him, and then he burst himself into a puff of smoke and disappeared from the room. And in the morning, when the husband came in and saw the final 5 shirts, he thanked his wife for her hard work. But you can bet that the very next day, she sat down with her maids and learned to sew. And in 11 months' time, she had become the finest seamstress in all the land.